All right, one more YouTube. I wanted to in this, Friday before the big stream. I did want to talk about something I missed on Saturday, and that was the Supreme Court ruling. I think in voting rights. Where the hell it's it. Just to give you a rundown, I'm just trying to figure out. I can't remember what state. Is it Arizona? I can't quite remember. We're going to hear all about it, but basically, the Supreme Court is considering allowing a state to run its own elections, which would set a legal precedent that would effectively destroy American democracy, because it would allow states to all have individual, separate, special rules, even more so than what we have now. To allow whatever corrupt politician to change whatever they want about local elections there, that would, forever solidify one party's rule, left or right. And we have this extremely right-wing, extremely biased, extremely corrupt Supreme Court looking at this, and it could literally change the face of America. It could change American democracy. It could change the entire democratic experiment irrevocably. We'll never know, Clutch. The only person that knows what's in the briefcase, buddy, is Tarantino. He's the only one. So let's tune in. Let's see how serious this is, because this could happen right away. And I guess I should probably change this.
Supreme Court today heard arguments in a case that could have far-reaching effects and dramatically reshape the country's elections. John Yang explains.
Judy, this case hinges on the interpretation of these 22 words in the Constitution. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Now, does that mean only state lawmakers can regulate elections, including drawing congressional districts, however they want to, without state courts reviewing their decisions? Or should the term legislature be read broadly to mean the entire apparatus of state government, including state courts interpreting state constitutions? Justices wrestled with this case for nearly 3 hours today, twice the allotted time. Marcia Coyle is chief Washington correspondent for the National Law Journal, and Nate Persily is an election law scholar at Stanford University. Mr. Persily, the immediate case here is about redistricting in North Carolina.
So it's North Carolina. It doesn't, I didn't really remember the state because it doesn't really matter. The conservatives, as soon as they got their conservative majority, were just fishing for these cases that these ideal cases that they could bring the Supreme Court, because it's all about setting precedent. If you don't quite understand how this legal shit works, there's a lot of things that are kind of the law of the land that aren't explicitly laid out as laws, because there's something called precedent in the court. Basically, it starts with the Supreme. It can sometimes start with the Supreme Court, but it could actually start locally as well. But when you set a precedent in court, you basically set a new standard for how cases like that in the future will be judged. And of course, the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court, right? It's the law of the land. So when the Supreme Court sets a precedent, all future, and this is what happened with Roe v. Wade, right? Roe v. Wade wasn't a law that was passed because that's what we're saying. It needs to be codified into law. Roe v. Wade was a court case that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with Roe, and that set a precedent, right? So this is this is how right-wing fascists and neoliberal Democrats are going to legally install an authoritarian government.
The state court sent the lawmakers back to the drawing board twice, and even the second stab, they said, was a pro-Republican gerrymander. And so they had a panel of experts draw up their own map, the court's own map, for use in last month's elections. What about the future? What are the consequences if the court adopts this theory, which is called the independent state legislature theory?
It's terrible.
Well, they could issue a narrow ruling or they could issue a broad ruling. In its narrowest, the court would say that that state constitutions really cannot constrain state legislatures, so that a state judge, whether it's at the state Supreme Court or a trial court judge, would not be able to use the state's constitution to prevent partisan gerrymandering. But there could be broader interpretations as well, because as you mentioned, this clause does not it's not a gerrymandering clause. It's a clause about elections, congressional elections. And so this could potentially prevent state courts from applying state constitutional provisions that apply to all of the electoral system.
It's the nightmare.
Absentee voting,
It's nightmare.
primary elections,
No.
anything that could be interpreted as the time, place, and manner of congressional elections.
And isn't this theory what President Trump's lawyers used to argue about keeping Donald Trump in the White House after the 2020 elections?
Well, that's right. That's not this particular clause. There's a separate clause in Article 2 that relates to presidential electors and the power of a state legislature to appoint them. So if you really believe that the state legislature is independent and is not subject, say, to state judicial review under a state's constitution, that would apply to the state's choice of electors as well, which would be given solely to the state legislature.
Marcia,
I'm not going to make some cringy Star Wars comparison, but this is how democracy dies, folks. This is it. This is it. This is it. This is it. What more? It is Saint
you were in the courtroom today for these 3 hours of arguments.
Yes.
Now, there was a lot of skepticism from the liberal justices about this. Here's Justice Elena Kagan.
When we think about this word legislature, we're thinking about it as embedded in a system of constraints. And one of those constraints is the governor, and another of those constraints is the courts. And that's the normal way that legislatures operate and act, is as subject, not as absolute, but as subject to constraints.
What's the significance of that?
Well, this is very important. Justice Kagan, and also this concern was echoed by Justice Sotomayor and Justice Jackson. As Justice Kagan further explained, under this theory that the Republican leaders of the North Carolina legislature are pushing, Justice Kagan said the theory would get rid of checks and balances, the normal checks and balances that we see operating in government today. And she said that are critically needed right now more than ever. So that concern continued to play in her questioning as well as the other justices. In fact, Justice Jackson made a point that she had a hard time, she said, wrapping her mind around the fact, well, state constitutions are the source of authority for state legislatures. And here, state legislatures, under this theory, are saying we can violate the state constitution.
Now, for the conservative majority, originalism is very important to them, the history and tradition of the laws. Today, there was even a question from Justice Alito about the meaning of fair elections in the North Carolina Constitution in this exchange with Donald Verrilli, who was arguing for the North Carolina election officials.
I guess the point is that what is this free elections clause trying to get at in the North Carolina Constitution and the other constitutions that adopted it at the time of the framing?
All right, 1776, 200 plus years ago. Was anybody at that time saying election isn't free if there's political gerrymandering?
Where else did this argument come up today?
This case very much involves what at least 4 justices are committed to, originalism. And they look at constitutional questions through the lens of text, history, and tradition. And so the supporters of this theory believe
That's the lie that they tell people. It's like how libertarians say they believe in liberty, but they actually believe in a corporate authoritarianism. Very, very close to what one would consider a fascism, right? Oh, we just want freedom and liberty. That's why we want to create a system that could be easily gained and would instantly create tribes that are more powerful than the other. It's the same shit. We just want to follow the Constitution exactly as it's written, except for all those things that we don't like. except for all that stuff we don't like. But we're just trying to follow the Constitution exactly as it's written, except for all that stuff that we don't like.
That history is on their side, whereas the opponents of the theory believe that history is on their side. And I would have to say that the weight of history, if you do respect American historians and
because they don't respect the amendments, right? It's in the fucking Constitution that it should be amended. Oh, they don't respect that part.
they filed numerous briefs in this case.
They respect some of the amendments. Let's be clear. Some of the amendments, that's cool. That free speech one, though, that's gotta go. That's gotta go. And eventually, folks, don't you fucking believe that just because, oh, it's a right winger, I get to keep my gun. Oh yeah, it's a right wing authoritarianism, I get to keep my gun. Oh, the fuck you do. The fuck you do. Because the first time you push back with those toys, guess who's gonna get them taken away by Daddy DeSantis? You fucking fool.
The weight of history is really on the opposite side of the North Carolina Republican lawmakers.
And they
Mr.
know it.
Verrilli
They know
was
it.
talking about the free election clause in the North Carolina Constitution. And those clauses, really 30 states, I believe, and the professor can correct me if I'm wrong, have those free election clauses. Many of them were adopted in the late 18th century, early 19th century, and today they're viewed as requiring fair elections and the fair administration of elections. Justice Alito's comments seem to suggest, well, he was skeptical that when they were adopted and even earlier that anybody had in mind partisan gerrymandering.
Nate, personally, would those parts of those state constitutions go away if the Supreme Court adopted this reasoning, this theory?
Well, they wouldn't apply to federal elections. They might still apply to state elections. But the idea of the independent state legislature doctrine is that the legislatures are independent and that these state constitutional provisions related to elections couldn't be applied to them by the state Supreme Courts. I really want to emphasize how sort of radical this idea is. I mean, when
This is
sort of in high
insane.
school civics,
This is it. This is it. This is it.
learn about federalism, we learn about separation of powers and checks and balances. This rips all of that away. You're going to have potentially the U.S. Supreme Court telling a state Supreme Court what it's able to do, and it's going to basically unmoor these state legislatures from their state constitutions.
This is it.
Marcia, who seem to be the strongest proponents of this idea of the independent state legislature
The right-wing
theory?
fascists.
On the court.
Well, it's hard to say who was strongest. I would say that most sympathetic appeared to be Justices Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch.
Shocked.
And then, as I mentioned earlier, the ones with the
Oh, this is my shocked face.
greatest skepticism and concern were Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson. Now that sort of
Wow.
leaves the
Wow.
Chief Justice.
How does PBS talk about these things without giving you any details? I feel like I've learned negative things.
And Justices Kavanaugh and Amy
10
Coney
minutes of
Barrett,
this.
who really didn't tip their hands either way. All three of them made comments that might lead you to believe that they could go either way. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But I think those three justices may well hold the key to the fate of this theory, which, as the professor said, is really considered revolutionary.
Marcia?
These fucking centrists that saturate. Is this the only way we can do news now? Is this just how news is now? Completely fucking toothless, verging on useless. Is this the only way to do news? It really feels like the weakest possible way to present reality. You know, I'm not saying everything has to be tinged with a screaming maniac like the way I present news. But for the love of God, quite revolutionary. Sip my tea. Yeah, the end of the American democratic experiment's pretty fucking revolutionary. And why don't you call them out? Well, that would be quite biased. Oh, I would never want to be presented information as being biased. I just love it. I think it's amazing how PBS could just be this bad at what they do. Why'd I have this up?
The Supreme Court is hearing arguments today about a fringe legal theory that could give Republican legislatures the right to overturn state election results. NBC's Julia Ainsley is outside the court and joins us now. Hey, Julia. This case has to do with gerrymandering voting laws. Who has the final say? Explain.
That's right, Andrea, and it's still going on behind me. Right now, we're hearing from opponents of this North Carolina theory, really. It's the independent state legislature theory that Republicans in North Carolina have hung their hat on, saying that it's their legislature, not the courts, that have the right to do redistricting. And that could also apply to voting laws and how you vote, really. It could have wide-ranging consequences because it says that it's the legislatures, not governors, and not the courts in those states who will decide how people can vote. Now, that is a pretty extreme interpretation of the election.
That's Mitch McConnell being in charge. That's Ron DeSantis. That's every hardcore Republican governor who's doing everything in their power right now to change the current laws to allow them to functionally steal the election. And it just hands over the keys to the whole thing. The whole thing. They will immediately pass laws that will make it functionally impossible for them to be voted out of office. You'll still vote. You'll still vote. You'll put a little thing on some paper and put it in the mailbox, and it won't mean a goddamn thing. And that's what they want, because they know that they're teetering on the verge of irrelevancy. Nick Fuentes says it out loud, and he knows, because he's right. He knows what's going on. He sees it. They know that the only way that they're going to keep their relevancy is by force. They can't ask nicely for gay people to go back in the closet, but they can basically do it by force. And that's the plan.
Election clause, but it's an interpretation that we know that Justices Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch have already signed on to, because this case came before the Supreme Court just before midterms, when they said that temporarily they would block North Carolina and allow the court to throw out their redistricting map. But that was just on a preliminary stay. This is now on the merits of the case. So there are a few justices we're listening to very closely here. One was Amy Coney Barrett, to see if Justice Coney Barrett will decide not to side with the state in this case. And we're also listening to a lot of very fervent opinions from the left, including from Justice Elena Kagan. Here's what she had to say earlier today.
This is a theory with big consequences. It would say that if a legislature engages in the most extreme forms of gerrymandering, there is no state constitutional remedy for that, even if the courts think that that's a violation of the Constitution. And you might think that it gets rid of all those checks and balances at exactly the time when they are needed most.
Oh my God, stop with the flirtation. Call it what it is. This is an authoritarian takeover of our government. This is a systemic destruction of the pillars of our democracy. This is making a mockery of constitutional democracy. And what do you have to say? Ho hum, maybe gee whiz, I don't know, maybe I don't know. My God, man. My God, do we need to be standing in the rubble of our fucking country before someone admits that there was a fucking problem?
This is at exactly the time when they are needed most.
So you can see here, just as Justice Kagan points out, that there's so much writing on this. What started as a fringe theory around the 2000 election has now moved into more prominence inside conservative legal circles. And Andrea, it essentially would allow those who win to be in control. So even if Democrats were to control a state legislature, they would then be able to draw districting maps and make rules that could benefit their party, because you wouldn't have the check of a court. So this is a really consequential case, and that's why so many people are watching it today.
What if I told you that the single most important case on American democracy and for American democracy in the nation's history is going before the Supreme Court this week? And what if I told you the entire outcome of this case, potentially the fate of our democracy itself, may rest with one justice, Amy Coney Barrett? because that's what's at stake in the case of Moore v. Harper, with oral arguments set for Wednesday. Moore refers to North Carolina's Republican Speaker of the House, Tim Moore. After the state Supreme Court threw out North Carolina's congressional maps over extreme gerrymandering in the GOP's favor, Moore argued that the court had no standing to do so, and that the power to draw maps rests solely with the state legislature. Moore's case leans heavily into a fringe legal theory known as independent state legislature doctrine, and I'm using both the words theory and doctrine in the loosest of terms. The independent state legislature theory suggests that the Constitution grants state legislatures uninhibited power to regulate.
This media company has millions of dollars. Why am I hearing amateur Bush League level feedback on the mic? Is he even he's not even in a studio. What is he at? Is he in front of a green screen in his home? MSNBC? Where's this money? Where's the money going? Where's the money going, MSNBC? You got this guy in a fucking storage garage in front of a webcam. Dude, I got a more expensive setup than he does. Get yourself a fucking amplifier. It cost me $300, Medi. I don't want to hear the fucking through your whole fucking 10-minute report. Fuck.
Organize federal elections, meaning they can gerrymander. They can pass voter suppression laws, and in its most extreme interpretation, they could perhaps even overturn an election, and no one can stop them. But to really understand all this, we need to take a look back at another famous or infamous Supreme Court case.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just released its ruling in one of the most important decisions it will make in its modern history.
Reversed. The decision's been reversed. The U.S. Supreme Court has reversed the decision of the Florida Supreme Court.
So that means that the Supreme Court's order, which allowed for the manual recounts, is wiped off the books.
What does that mean? At the stroke of midnight, it is now conclusive that the 25 electors of Florida move into George Bush's column and cannot be contested.
Yes, Bush v. Gore, which decided the 2000 presidential election in favor of George W. Bush. See, for 200 years, the Supreme Court rejected this idea of an independent state legislature theory or doctrine, or ISL, let's call it for short. But in 2000, in his concurrence, and joined by Justices Clarence Thomas and Antonin Scalia, then Chief Justice William Rehnquist introduced this ISL idea by suggesting that the recounts mandated by Florida's courts conflicted with the election rules set down by Florida's state legislature. And it was the legislature that had primacy based on the language in the Constitution's Article 2 Electors Clause. In fact, that's why this is all so complicated and kind of absurd, because this entire fringe nonsense theory relies on a tortured argument over the meaning of one word that appears in two crucial clauses of the Constitution. There's Article 1, Section 4, the Elections Clause, which states the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. And that legislature thereof language comes up again in Article 2, Section 1, the Electors Clause, referenced by Rehnquist in 2000, which outlines how states are to choose their electors for a presidential election. So it all comes down to the meaning of legislature. As Vox's Ian Millhiser explains, for subscribers of ISL, legislature means the elected members of the state House and Senate.
And don't think for one fucking second that we lost democracy because of this. Because if it wasn't this, it'd be something else. It's always something. They always find a little technicality, a little here, a little there. Look it up. Look at every time a fascist authoritarian government has been voted in democratically. It's always with these little tricks. Okay, so don't think that this is a failure of the founding fathers who didn't word the Constitution. It could be locked tight, and it does not matter. It does not matter. This is all a smokescreen. It's all an excuse. It's all a nice coat of paint over an actual pile of hot diarrhea.
One else. Not the governor, not the state Supreme Court, and not even the state constitution. But as Millhiser argues, when the Constitution was drafted, the word legislature did not mean the elected body of men and women who make up the House and Senate. And even the Supreme Court upheld in a 2015 case that legislature means the power that makes the laws. I mean, think about it. America's founding fathers were building a new nation free of centralized and tyrannical monarchy and filled with checks and balances. In what world would they want state lawmakers to have unchecked powers around elections? And for the past century, the Supreme Court has again and again rejected ISL in 1916, again in 1932, and yet again in 2015, that case I just mentioned. Even in Bush v. Gore, the justices said their decision was limited to just that particular circumstance, and Rehnquist's theory remained on the legal fringe for 2 decades. That is until a 2020 case out of Wisconsin having to do with election rules at the height of the pandemic. Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh both cited ISL in concurrences, asserting that it's state legislatures and no one else who are primarily responsible for setting election rules in that state. Kavanaugh, who worked on the legal team for the Bush side of Bush v. Gore, explicitly cited Rehnquist and Bush v. Gore in his 2020 concurrence. Then, earlier this year, when the Supreme Court initially rejected this Moore case, Justice Samuel Alito wrote a dissenting opinion saying the case presents the unanswered question around the extent of a state court's authority to reject rules adopted by a state legislature for use in conducting federal elections. Alito wrote, "We will have to resolve this question sooner or later, and the sooner we do so, the better." Yeah. Alito was joined by Gorsuch and Justice Clarence Thomas
do it before 2024.
in that opinion. And of course, the Supreme Court eventually did take on the case. Okay, so that's 4 sitting Supreme Court justices, all conservatives, signaling their openness to independent state legislature doctrine. Chief Justice John Roberts has signaled he's not really on board with ISL, nor are any of the 3 liberal justices. Surprise. So that leaves conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett as an unknown vote when it comes to...
It's not unknown. It's not fucking unknown where she stands on this. Come on. Come on. Bible, it's the Bible's number 1 in Amy Coney Barrett's fucking
to the ISL doctrine. Unless anyone has a change of heart, this final Trump appointee to the Supreme Court bench could be the deciding factor in Moore v. Harper. But here's the thing. Despite what Moore or Kavanaugh or Alito might say, even top conservative legal experts and scholars broadly reject this theory. For example, Benjamin Ginsburg, a longtime top election lawyer for the GOP, he warns that if the justices adopt ISL, it will create untenable legal uncertainty and increases the chances that state legislatures replace the popular vote with their own political preferences. Now, there is disagreement on the exact extent of this fringe theory, of how it would work in practice if they give the blessing, if the Supreme Court bless it, whether the justices would rule so broadly as to explicitly allow state legislatures to overturn the popular vote. But it opens the door, and there's no reason to doubt that the GOP will take advantage. How do we know? Well, they've tried already. Remember this guy? Trump lawyer John Eastman, one of the architects of a plan to have then Vice...
You might recognize him better with his goofy fucking cowboy
Remember this
hat.
guy?
He's the fruitcake that wears the cowboy hat. He was the one that did the speech before Trump did on January 6th.
Trump lawyer John Eastman, one of the architects of a plan to have then Vice President Mike Pence throw out electoral votes for Biden and accept alternate electors who would vote for Trump instead. Independent state legislature doctrine was the centerpiece of his dastardly plan, a ridiculous plan. But he tried to convince state-level officials to go along with it, including Arizona's Republican Speaker of the House, Rusty Bowers.
And I said, you're asking me to do something that's never been done in history, the history of the United States, and I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof, and that's going to be good enough with me? That I would put us through that, my state, that I swore to uphold both in Constitution and in law? No, sir.
Rusty Bowers did not go along with John Eastman's sham plan. But depending on how the justices rule in this case, perhaps his GOP successor as Arizona House Speaker could come 2024.
And let's be clear. If you listen to what that man was saying, he was basically saying, I wasn't going to do it unless you gave me enough proof. If you cranked it up. So he's basically, I would do it. He doesn't say under any circumstances I would never do that. I don't care what the circumstances were. Wasn't saying that. He's like, I'm not going to put. He's just saying, I don't have. It's too much. right? If this decision gets passed, it's not too much. It's all legal. It's all legit. It's all legal above board. What do you mean? Just following normal election laws. I have no problem destroying democracy at that point. No biggie. It's all about party. Right? Don't think this fucking moron's a fucking hero. Okay, don't you fucking get it twisted. This man is a right wing. I don't know. Fascistic. I don't know. I mean, it's anybody he still fully supports the right wing conservative party. He's happy to serve Mitch McConnell. Thinks he's a great politician.
Perhaps his GOP successor as Arizona House Speaker could come 2024. Look, I started the show telling you that this is the single most important case on American democracy and for American democracy in the nation's history. But those aren't my words, as much as I agree with them. They're the words of retired federal judge and Bush senior appointee J. Michael Luttig, the man who on January the 5th told Mike Pence he had no legal authority to throw out electors. Luttig is a staunch opponent of independent state legislature.
This was Mr. Dramatic pauses that he did so much that we thought he was a stroke victim. But he wasn't a stroke victim. He was just a moron.
Theory. Writing in The Atlantic in October, such a doctrine would be antithetical to the framers' intent and to the text, fundamental design, and architecture of the Constitution. Luttig has since joined the Moore v. Harper case as co-counsel on the Harper side. But when it comes right down to it, this is not a legal story. It is a political one. It's a story of Republican lawmakers wanting to use Republican-led legislatures to force more Republican lawmakers into office. Will of the people be damned? The big question is, will a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court with 3 Trump appointees on it let them do it? And perhaps the even bigger question is, are the rest of us even paying attention to this perhaps democracy-defining Supreme Court case?
No, because of the fucking party that you support, you fucking goonie. It's not racist, right? It's a Disney property. There you have it. There you have it. There you have it. Is this how democracy died? To raucous applause? No, democracy dies, with a fucking silent but deadly fart in the middle of the night, and no one even realizes it happens. They just wake up, and it's no longer democracy now. Oh, gee, what happened? I only wasn't paying attention and didn't do anything to help my government or help civics at all. I just fucking, all I cared about was my own pleasure. I couldn't even be bothered to vote my own self-interests. Didn't I trigger enough people? I thought I was supposed to trigger people. That's what politics is now, making other people mad. What do you mean, my kid's future? What's that? There you go. This ain't no fucking joke. This ain't no fucking joke. You think when I tell people you got to get involved in politics, you think I'm playing? You think this is some fucking... You think I'm having fun here? This is it. This is it. This is the most powerful military on planet Earth, being controlled by authoritarian fascists. Oh, what do you mean? I don't see no Hitler. I don't see no Sieg Heil. It's going to become wrapped in the flag, carrying the Bible. And here it is. It's all going to be legal. It's all going to be above board. You'll still put that name on the fucking ballot, and you'll still put it in the fucking thing. Won't mean a goddamn thing. All right, and then you'll get in the streets, and you'll finally understand why you needed to do it years ago. But they have all the power already. They have it all. They can stomp you out. And what are you going to do? Who are your cries? Who are going to listen to your cries? The corporate mainstream media. All they want is an interview. They're not going to hear your cries. The politicians who are bought and sold, only ones there are there to compromise the system. Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers when it comes to what Congress is achieving versus what the populace actually wants. Less than 10% of what people actually want to get accomplished is getting accomplished. That's it. This is it. Thank you, YouTube. Please like and subscribe, and please get out in the streets. Please, I'm begging you.